Now we're looking at stars, and then we start looking at galaxies. And we see similar ideas, but multiplied by billions. Same problem with stars, except multiplied a billion times. If we can get the material condensed enough, you can find gravitational collapse taking over everywhere. But how do you get it to that point? With stars, you can imagine that, but you can't get it to the point where it starts. And then with galaxies, you can calculate the amount of mass that ought to be there to hold it together, but better than 90% of the mass necessary to hold it together is unobserved. We can't find it. It's called by evolutionists the missing mass. They got more answers to something they don't understand with puzzling things like the missing mass. And then they have textbooks showing evolution instead of devolution among species. Not smaller to larger, but larger to smaller. And then we look at the formations like barred and spiral galaxies. These straight bars of star formations, which appear to be dissecting the special spiral galaxies, are amazing if they have been spinning as long as we have been told by evolutionists that they have been spinning. That organizational structure that we see would wrap itself up, according to Kepler's third law, in just a few thousand years. We see the principle illustrated with spinning ice skaters. They hold their arms out, they spin more slowly, and as they pull them in, they spin faster. Likewise, with these barred spiral galaxies that are spinning very rapidly, more rapidly than evolutionist theories can account for, the interior would spin faster, and the outer part would spin more slowly. And if you've got a bar through the middle, how in the world you get it there, they don't know. It would wrap itself up and self-destruct in just a few thousand years. Yet there they are. How did they get there? How did they stay there? Especially if the universe is billions of years old. Not only do we see organizational structure of stars within galaxies, but we see organizational structures of multiple galaxies themselves. And we see a global cluster of thousands, if not billions, of galaxies. And that is mind-boggling. The global cluster of billions of galaxies, which are organizations of billions of stars, which are organizations of immense amounts of matter. And we see great organization. How do you account for that by natural law? Well, consider the struggle that's expressed in Discover magazine in 1988 by Nobel laureate Alfvén in an article entitled "The Big Bang Never Happened." He says, for years, astrophysicists have invoked some kind of dark matter to explain why spiral galaxies rotate as fast as they do and why galaxy clusters do not fly apart. There are billions of stars. Extra gravity needed to form the galaxies and clusters in the first place. Haynes Alfvén, Discover magazine. And he talks about the extra gravity needed to form the galaxies and clusters in the first place, that they can't be accounted for. The mass is missing that would be necessary to produce that extra gravity. They rotate too fast. Why don't they fly apart? They shouldn't. They should. How do you get them to form in the first place? And he goes on, he talks about the extra gravity needed to form the galaxies and clusters in the first place that they can't account for. The mass is missing that would be necessary to produce that extra gravity. They rotate too fast. Why don't they fly apart? They should. How do you get them to form in the first place? Here we are told we are looking at some 1 million galaxies. Wow. And we see organizational structure that ties these galaxies together. And we're told about the Great Wall, which expands over hundreds of millions of light years, even billions of light years. The Big Bang that has been proposed as an explanation cannot begin to account for it. Consider the statement by a number of leading astronomers in the world: Harp, Burbidge, Hoyle, and others. The Big Bang model offers a universe created in a smooth, featureless condition out of which a highly structured universe is nevertheless supposed to have evolved. Numerous attempts have been made to explain how this miracle is supposed to have happened. Little more than ingenious hand-waving, though. Perhaps this is why they are called scenarios. Harp, Burbage, Hoyle, and others. Now, they're just stories made up to try to explain it, ignoring the second law of thermodynamics, ignoring the attraction of mass unless you imagine a lot of matter, 90% of which is missing. What you observe is highly organized structure which is dissipating. Now, that's precisely what the creationist would predict, but it is hardly what the evolutionists would predict. Some of them have faced it, although most of them do not. Some of them are courageous enough to publish in well-known magazines and places. What we observe is deterioration. We see organization there, but it's going downhill. That's what the second law predicts. That's the most fundamental generalization scientists have ever been able to make about the universe. That's what we see. But they imagine just the opposite. Consider H.J. Lipson, professor of physics, University of Manchester, writing in Physics Bulletin, he says, I think, however, that we should go further than this and admit that the only accepted explanation is creation. Wow. I know that is an anathema to physicists, as it is to me, but we must not reject a theory that we do not like if the experimental evidence supports it. That's honest. H.J. Lipson, Physics, University of Manchester, Physics Bulletin. He wrote that in 1980. I think that makes sense. We're supposed to go by the facts, the experimental evidence. Consider the statement in Fundamentals of Classical Thermodynamics, a textbook that just states what the necessary implications of these observations are. We see the second law of thermodynamics as a description of the prior and continuing work of a creator who also holds the answer to our future destination, our destiny, and that of the universe. G.J. Van Weyden, Richard Sontag, Fundamentals of Classical Thermodynamics. Now that's a brave statement made by those who are writing textbooks, who are authorities in the field. Compare several quotations from Dr. Patton's notes on this. I think all suggested accounts of the origin of the solar system are subject to serious objections. The conclusion is the present state of the subject would be that the system cannot exist. Sir H. Jeffreys, Cambridge, The Earth. All of the hypotheses so far presented have failed or remain unproved when physical theory is properly applied. Fred Whipple, Harvard, Orbiting the Sun. It's far easier to explain why the moon shouldn't be there than to explain its existence. Nafi Taxos, MIT Science Magazine. The great puzzle is where all the order in the universe came from originally. How did the cosmos get wound up if the second law of thermodynamics predicts asymmetric unwinding toward disorder? Paul C.W. Davies, King's College, London. All right, Dr. Boss says, the evolutionist is plagued with an immediate observation that the universe is somewhat in chaos. He interprets this as the second law of thermodynamics, which states that everything is increasing in random order from complex to less complex. This second law of thermodynamics demands that there had to have been a time in the past when everything was in perfect synchronization, that is, orchestral creation. The first law of thermodynamics is one of energy conservation. The energy is neither created nor destroyed. The second law of thermodynamics can basically be stated that in spite of this conservation, the first law, the energy available for useful work does decrease. It does decrease so that the universe can be said to be running down. Example, the sun's energy is dissipating via heat into the universe. The dissipation of raw materials or raw energy into the universe, such as from the sun, is observed to cause destruction, a destructive devolving, and not a constructive evolving effect. So everything is to be devolving and not evolving. I made that statement the last couple of days repeatedly, and it just doesn't sink in. Henry Morris states in Back to Genesis, in a periodical, evolutionists have a most amazing faith. They believe that people have evolved up from the ape or something like an ape, that apes and other mammals have evolved from reptiles, that reptiles have evolved from amphibians, amphibians from fish, fish from some unknown phylum of multi-celled invertebrates, that invertebrates in all their phyla evolved from some unknown protozoan, that some other unknown protozoan evolved from complex chemicals, and that the complex chemical elements evolved from the simplest chemical element of all, namely hydrogen. The operative word in the above sentence is believe. There is no evidence for this remarkable chain of events. Apes and reptiles and vertebrates and invertebrates and chemical elements, including hydrogen, still are here in abundance, but none of them are changing into anything else. Neither are there any evolutionary transitions documented in the records of the past, despite olden tales of mermaids and centaurs. Not even in the fossils, which are purported to represent 1 billion years of Earth history. This remarkable chain of events is in reality nothing but a remarkable statement of faith in the greatest God, hydrogen, the elemental substance which is supposed to be the father and mother of us all. Thus hydrogen, the simplest chemical element, is a colorless, odorless, tasteless gas which, given 10 billion years or so, produces people. That quaint definition, originally suggested by the late creationist astronomer George Mulfinger, is a cogent summary of the faith one must exercise in order to be an evolutionist. It was the prince of evolutionary astronomers, Harlow Shapley, a long-time head of the Harvard University Observatory, who long ago pontificated that people today should rewrite the first verse of Genesis. According to him, it should be something like, in the beginning, hydrogen created the heavens and the earth. Most evolutionary astronomers and cosmologists have thus ruled out the idea of a personal, omnipotent, omniscient God as creator of the universe. A more recent scientist has put it this way: take some matter, heat while stirring, and wait. That is the modern version of Genesis. The fundamental forces of gravity, electromagnetism, and the strong and weak nuclear forces are presumed to have done the rest. Andrew Scott, Update on Genesis, New Scientists. But I would say this writer, perhaps not suspecting that some creationist might happen to read his evaluation of this statement of faith, proceeds to make the following admission. But how much of this neat tale is firmly established, and how much remains hopeful speculation? In truth, the mechanism of almost every major step, from chemical precursors up to the first recognizable cells, is the subject of either controversy or complete bewilderment. To unbiased observers, it must seem that every major step from one degree of organization to the next higher degree is not only speculative but impossible, at least in any realistic sense. The chief problem among many is the second law of thermodynamics, which notes that everything at least tends to go downward toward disorganization, and certainly not greater organization. Presumably, the universe began in a very chaotic state. A chaotic state is by definition a state of high entropy. When we speak of chaos, we mean that there is a great deal of disorder. On the other hand, numerous kinds of structure have appeared since the universe began. But how can this be if entropy